Wargaming decided that it was now time to finally buff the FE215B, and no, not the 183, but in fact the heavy tank that features essentially a rear-mounted turret that is supposed to be a side scraper so that you can pull out from corners and essentially not take any damage by using the armor and making sure that your armor is very well angled without having to expose the frontal plates, being that upper plate and of course the gigantic lower plate, which is made of absolute paper. If we look at the armor viewer, as you can see, looking at about 100mm on the bottom of that plate, and then with a 152mm upper plate that is somewhat angled but is quite low profile that people shoot down onto it. It's often a place where you'll also get penned, and so you have to rely on trying to side scrape in this thing if you even have a chance at being able to bounce any rounds at all. And even the side armor is 100mm thick, so often then you would still get penned in the side unless you were at a very steep angle, something like this. But either way, Wargaming did, when they came across this vehicle once again, having seen that it is one of the least performing heavy tanks and probably one of the least used heavy tanks in the game, they decided to buff this kind of squares either side of the mantler or the turret ring, just underneath the actual turret itself. You can see them, they're here, and then on the other side, that flat plate. So essentially before, when you tried to angle so that you were like this, for example, you had these plates which everybody could pen because they were more like 150mm as opposed to the 254mm that they are now, which allows you to essentially use this as a kind of, I guess, somewhat bit of armor, and so it becomes less of a weak point. Now, 90% of the time, the bane of this tank's existence is high caliber, high penetration, high alpha main armaments from other tier 10 vehicles. Yeah, they're gonna have 254mm of penetration, and so basically every tier 10 is gonna go through those places that you can see, making it very difficult to realistically bounce any rounds in this tank anyway. So with all of the buffs and changes, what has changed about this tank? Is it actually any good? Is it worth playing? Is it worth actually purchasing for 6.1 million silver to actually get in the game, considering that there are two alternative British heavy tanks in the tech tree, being the Chieftain Mark 6 and the Super Conqueror? Well, I think today we're going to actually have a look and see whether it is worth getting. Now, straight off the bat, this tank has 400 alpha damage. This is the same as both the Chieftain and the Super Conqueror. The good thing about this tank though is it has nearly 4000 DPM compared to the Chieftain, which has in the region of about similar sort of level, and with the Super Conqueror being significantly lower than the FE215B. So the real question is do you play the Chieftain or do you play the FE215B? And I'm sure if you've watched any length of videos on my channel that you would probably want to pick the Chieftain, or at least before the buffs you would probably want to pick the Chieftain. Not only is the Chieftain got an actual turret, which has significantly harder turret to actually pen, albeit it does have that cupola on the top of the tank right there. You can see it. It's super easy to pen if you can hit it. Its actual turret and the front of the turret, very, very strong. The upper plate is also pretty decent as well, since it's really well rounded and a bit funny and a bit funky. Its angles can create some bounces. Now, most people will just go through it anyway, but it is very, very well angled. And in fact, most people will just auto ricochet off of this thing if they're looking at it. The lower plate's gigantic and huge, as with all of the British heavy tanks, to be honest, regardless of if you play the Super Conqueror, if you play the Chieftain Mark 6, or you play the FE215B. They're gigantic. They are the biggest weak point of the British heavy tanks, and so if you can see the hull armor, it's basically an instant pen. But Chieftain moves at 46 km an hour compared to the 34 of the FE215B, so you're definitely going to be wanting the Chieftain for the speed, the turret armor, and then yeah, you're going to basically have the same sort of DPM. And if we pop in the FE215B's crew in here, you'll be able to see the actual DPM. So yeah, it's actually even better than the FE42 or 215B, which basically makes the FE215B redundant, other than the fact that you can use a rear mounted turret. But is the rear mounted turret worth trading off the armor and worth trading off the DPM alongside a multitude of different things? Now this tank doesn't indeed have improved ventilation, which is why the Chieftain was able to have slightly better DPM, but base values, they should basically be the exact same. So yeah, you realistically, do you want a rear mounted turret with slightly worse armor, or do you want a actual tank that can move a little bit faster, use ridge lines much more effectively, and be able to be more competitive? That is the real question. However, the good thing that I do like about the FE is that it feels very, very nice to use. Its gun handling is very, very good. It gets 7 degrees of gun depression, so the Chieftain gets 10. But the FE is primarily, once again, trying to be used as more of a brawling tank where you side scrape off of a corner to try and get some damage. So that's kind of how you want to play this tank. You don't want to be using it on a ridge line. It is very large, it's very long, and because of the rear mounted turret, if the front of the vehicle goes up just a tad, by the time you get to the back of the vehicle, because it's all locked in place, it's all fixed, essentially the turret is going to be looking way higher than maybe if you had a frontal mounted vehicle, because you get that kind of pivot from the back of the vehicle when you raise up the front, and so it feels horrible to use on a ridge line. So you definitely don't want to be doing that, and the only way to actually negate that is by reversing up to the slope and trying to use the gun depression that way. But of course, when you're doing that, if you expose any amount of the back of the vehicle, you get penned, and yeah, it's not fun at all. This tank is also called the Tinderbox. Now I guess you can I guess it's self-explanatory. Tinderbox used to create fires, and the FE215B is a gigantic cesspool of fire, whereby if you get hit through the front of this vehicle, you get penned and you get set on fire almost every single time. Well, why? Well, it's because someone came up with a great idea of putting the engine directly in the front, and not only just directly in the front of the vehicle, but directly in the front of the right side of the lower plate. So if you hit this tank in the right side of the lower plate, you have a lovely fire chance with this tank. And what is that fire chance? I believe that they do tell you. It is internal fire chance 20%. So almost every single battle you'll find, if someone hits you in the lower plate, you'll get set on fire, because 5 shells, that's a good chance of getting set on fire if you hit the same roll. So yeah, not good at all when it comes to fire. And you might be thinking, well, okay, it's fire, blah blah blah, what about ammo? Where is the ammo located? Well, it's located on the side of the turret, and trust me when I say, if you get hit in the side of the turret right there where you see the white box outline, it's a lovely ammo rack, and your turret goes flying off as well. And if you hit the rear of the tank, the same thing. If you hit the side of the rear of the tank, it's the same thing. So yeah, this tank has some problems when it comes to internal modules, and very rarely do I actually highlight them, but this tank is especially bad because of that frontal engine module that will definitely be penned. And even if you get hit in the side, remember the front and it's basically everywhere. The engine is just gigantic, and you'll find yourself just getting penned. You can see it there, literally side of the vehicle at the front, it's just fire central. So it's very rare that you won't just get your engine knocked out and you won't get your engine set on fire. Other than that though, hopefully that gives you a little introduction to the FE215B. But this is a brilliant, and I will quote this is a brilliant support heavy vehicle. Play it almost like a support medium or a medium tank, that plays somewhat like a heavy in some situations, but for the most part you are like a very slow medium that, yeah, can use its armor occasionally. So let's jump into one gameplay to see what we could actually do with this tank and kind of talk about it a little bit more. So this game, of course, is Arctic region, and the reason why I wanted to show this tank is because essentially when a tank gets buffed, maybe it's actually worth getting, maybe it solves some of the problems that maybe it had, or maybe it just makes the tank completely overpowered. And so yeah, you saw that with the Panzer 7 that recently got buffed. That certainly helped out that vehicle, and it definitely made it a lot better. Now my main problem with this tank is it's not going to do that, unfortunately. So I'll tell you that one for free. It's definitely not overpowered in any sense of the word, and in fact it's not even really competitive. It's not even really any good, and so I think it's still a very average vehicle, I'll tell you that for free. And so if you're wondering, do I go ahead and specifically grind this vehicle, I think probably not if you want to start playing the game. If you're newer to the game, if you have barely any tier 10s, this is definitely not the vehicle to go for when it comes to your first tier 10s, maybe even your first 5 tier 10s. You'll probably want a much better kind of mix of vehicles, and this one really is quite a difficult tank to make work as a heavy tank, and often people will get stuck in that you should be playing a heavy tank like a heavy tank trying to brawl with people, and this tank is not a brawler in any sense of the word, so it becomes a real problem. But then in certain situations it is a brawler. It's like, what are you? Are you a medium? Are you a heavy tank? Why are you a slow medium? And why do you have no armor? It's one of those things that I feel like yeah, it can be a real pain. You also have that cupola weak point on the top, which we didn't really mention, but it can be penned almost by everyone. And it kind of is similar to what you see with a Conqueror. I mean, the turret itself looks somewhat like a Conqueror's turret, and so yeah, it really is somewhat decent. But remember is that you're going to be fighting on flat ground, so the turret really doesn't become too much of a kind of thing anyway. But the problem with this game is that it kind of shows you everything you really need to know, because we tried to go into some pretty normal positions, but the problem with this tank is that these normal positions are good if you're in a normal tank, but in this sort of thing it's very nuanced, it's very weird, and you feel like you can't really do anything in a lot of the times. And so we come over to this location here. Now this location primarily relies on that someone has pushed down to get onto the corner, otherwise you're having to fight TDs and tank destroyers and people that are basically going to get holed down on the ridgeline. And because this tank does not particularly have the best penetration on its standard rounds, and although the premium rounds are crazy with like 330 pen basically, you can pen a lot of people, but when they're only showing their turrets, even 330 pen is not going to be enough to actually go through the front of them. So rather than sit here and duke it out with tanks that are going to be sat hold down and potentially get YOLO'd by a T-57 heavy, we're going to move back again because it's just dynamic gameplay. And oh, the 57 heavy, do I go there? Do I go back? Which way do I actually go? Because right now I'm doing nothing. And that is what you'll feel like sometimes in some of these games, and often when you do find stuff to do, it's probably too late that you can't impact the game, and so often you'll end up just losing. And you can see me here wondering, do I go for the waffle? Well, no, because if I go for the waffle, there's going to be someone over to the left up on that hill where we just saw them when we went to the corner. So do I go back to the corner? Well, I can't do anything against a 57 heavy, because if I poke him, I'm going to get hit by the TDs and the machine from the back who are hold down, and so can't do anything there. Do I go back to base? Well, there's nothing really over in the base at the moment in time that I can actually pen, but I guess we can go here and hope we get one shot off. And this is literally the problem with this tank. You can't commit anywhere. You can't really guarantee that you can at least do something when you go to a flank, which is a real problem when you're supposedly playing that heavy tank role. So it very much relies on your team kind of making a push and you being able to support as best as you possibly can with the pretty decent DPM of about 4,000 when you are using this tank. So 4,000 DPM, really, really nice. Is it crazy? Is it overpowered? No, but it will certainly demolish people if you can catch them out on their own, and if you've got other people taking the hits for you. The good thing about this tank though, when it comes to taking hits, is it does get a lot of hit points, but remember it's gonna have less effective hit points because your armor's much worse than say something like an E100, which has 2,700. You are going to have consistently worse games, and you'll be on a lot less health after a lot fewer shells than an E100 will be, because you don't have any armor. So every shell you take is basically a pen. That goes the first one. We got hit, we got penned, and of course got tracked as well. And the problem with this is that the frontal armor can be a real pain, because often you'll get penned through the tracks and also tracked at the same time. Now you can see me just trying to angle here a little bit, probably over angled way too much on that one, but now I have to actually do something. But guess what, it's way too late in the game for me to actually impact it, and we're probably gonna lose this game. So you can kind of get my drift. And although maybe I haven't played exceptionally here, maybe we could have gone on the corner, maybe we could have done something, but then again I could have got hit by a TD for 900 health and set on fire straight through the front of the turret, which, yeah, I mean, it's just not the chieftain, is it? And so with that being said, you can see that we're just holding up in this location. It's a pretty decent location to begin with when you're trying to defend from this area, but the main problem is that you have to rely on people behind you to make this position work. And yeah, when you're having to rely on people for that, then it often doesn't work too well. And oh look, the Turan Brigade have just rocked up, and guess what? Those were the Turans that were sat on that hill that we just couldn't spot. So yay, Turans are everywhere, and if we did push to that corner, we would probably be taking a ton of hits from Turans. So yeah, make of that what you will. Now at this point I'm just trying to hold off back. We need to make sure that we've got one opponent in front of us at all times, not multiple all at once. So we pull back to this location. You can see me just trying to angle up to be able to get the best chance of bouncing this 57 heavy, who is probably going to push. We're also proxy detecting the, I believe it's a machine just to the left of us. You can see here we're actually angling here, and the 57 heavy's going for someone else. I'm not surprised. And there is the Turan. We hit him. He manages to hit our teammate who's behind us, and hopefully we can finish off this Turan. Please, please, please. Yes, we do. There we go, up to 2k damage. And of course, when this tank is firing, it feels really, really nice. You can deal lots of damage. You feel like you can actually do something, but it's getting into positions where actually starting firing isn't going to mean that you lose half or maybe even 3/4 of your hit points straight away. This T57 Heavy is of course trying to track us, and yeah, that is annoying, but either way we've got a little bit of assistance, and that's because this tank's VU range is pretty good. It is up to I believe in the region of about 500 or something like that when you do have all of the perks and equipment on. But the problem once again is that you have to expose yourself, and often when you expose yourself in an FE you are taking a lot of hits, so definitely don't do that. The one problem in this game is that we now have some tanks behind us, which has just stolen like 90% of our hit points. So we put our loader back in because, you know, loader bought the farm. If it isn't the Amarak going in this tank, it's the loader, and so he is out of the game. But we're up to 3k damage, and we are in quite possibly the worst situation you could ever be in a tank like this, whereby you have 5 or 6 opponents to try and deal with, and 3 of them are TDs. And remember that this tank is, how do we say, a TD magnet, and will often just take large shells from TDs very easily, and you can see we're just having to be quite I guess pokey with this tank right now to try and get some damage, otherwise it's just game over. The 57 Heavy is firing heat from the side, and because we've got gigantic tracks, it's just getting absorbed. And then we try and do a little bit of a reverse side scrape here just because I want to get one more shell, but the Ruthless finishes us off. And maybe this game is more of a showcase of why having, you know, 10 tank destroyers on each team at tier 10 is not particularly fun for everyone involved and leads to these horrible games. But you can see there, even in a pretty disgusting game, we can still have a decent amount of damage and of course a decent amount of assistance. But it just, this tank, it doesn't feel like you can do anything for the most of the game, and so you're having to rely on being a support tank, which I think we all know, when you're relying on other teammates to make the plays and do the pushes, you can end up with results that are significantly worse, which is why I think this tank is a very fun, cool tank that I actually really enjoy playing, but it's frustrating sometimes. But it's a whole world of fun. I really like it. I just find most people who are going to be playing this tank, and from a non-biased perspective where I actually rate the tank on what it should be, it's probably like a 5 out of 10 as a heavy tank. It's very average. It's probably below average. It's maybe a 4 out of 10 to be honest with you. But in terms of like an experienced player, they will quite like this tank because it has that DPM, and if you use it correctly, you can make it work. It's just very difficult to make work, and experience is the only way you're going to actually be able to make it work properly. Yeah, that is kind of how this tank actually plays. Has the buffs actually changed anything? Absolutely not, because ultimately the weak points, they were weak points, but only in a very, very, very minute situation. And it's mainly the side armor of this tank that makes it almost impossible to play, because even if you angle very well, people can still pen you in the side because it is just so thin. And even if you angle to the utmost ability, sometimes you end up over angling and it's just a free pen straight through the side of this tank, which is of course not what you want from a rear mounted side scraping tank. But other than that, hopefully that gives you an idea as to one of the most mediocre tanks in the game at tier 10, and probably not worth the time or the buffs that will be put into it to even get it to this point. But other than that, if you have any questions, if you have any queries, or maybe you completely disagree and think this is one of the best heavy tanks in the game, let me know in the comment section down below, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.